There is a shoreline outside Athens, where the sea holds a cruise ship on pause, a steel giant lying on its side, windows like open gills, decks turned into walls, and a skin of rust and graffiti that reads like a eulogy, see from the sky. This isn't a movie set, it's MS Mediterranean Sky. Once a proud liner, now have submerged in Elefsina Bay, a permanent landmark to everything that happens when a ship outlives its era, and no one can afford to save it. But the story doesn't start here. In 1953, she was born as TSMV City of York for Elefsina Lines, a post-war combination liner carrying both passengers and cargo on the London-South Africa run, cruising at roughly 17 knots through a world that still measured distance in days at sea. Then the jet's age hit like a tidal shift. Ocean time collapsed into flight hours. Ships like City of York had two choices: evolve or vanish. In 1971, she evolved, sold to Greece's Karageorgis Lines, rebuilt into a cruise ferry, and renamed Mediterranean Sky. The transformation was radical, gone were the cranes and old superstructure. In their place, longer lounges with forward windows, twin outdoor pools, expanded shops, and much more passenger space, capacity swelling past 800 as she pivoted to the Mediterranean's booming holiday lanes. By the 1970s and 80s, Mediterranean Sky was a familiar silhouette between Patras and Italy, the workhorse of summer routes, sometimes cruising, often ferrying, embodying the middle-class dream of cheap sunny crossings and nights on deck under sodium lights. Then came the slow squeeze, costs rose, competition tightened, and the schedules frayed. In 1996, she sailed her last voyage. After that, arrest 4 debts in Patras, a legal limbo, and finally the tow to Elefsina, Greece's grey harbour of laid-up holes and unanswered questions. Late 2002, water crept into the wrong places. Listing began. To keep her from sinking in deep water, tugs beached her on November 26th. Winter finished the job. By January 2003, Mediterranean Sky had rolled onto her port side, a 10-story caution sign, half above, half below. Years later, the wreck morphed into an accidental canvas. In 2018, the Linz 1UP crew roller painted their name across the exposed hull, a tag so huge it shows up on satellite imagery, a human scale footnote on an industrial scale failure. The wreck still leaks stories. Studies flagged a reasonably probable risk of hazardous releases. In 2020, slicks appeared. In 2022, a fire scorched the shell. Today, she's a drone magnet and an environmental dilemma. Too big to ignore, too expensive to erase. How did one ship live 3 lives? Liner, cruise ferry, ghost. And why did the last one end at a right angle to the horizon? Next, the rebuild, the design, the routes, and the onboard rhythm of a Mediterranean summer that felt like it could last forever. The second life began with a sail and a blueprint. In 1971, Elefsina City of York cross flags to Greece's Karageorgis Lines, went into heavy surgery and emerged with a new name and purpose. Mediterranean Sky. Not a cargo passenger hybrid anymore, but a full-blooded cruise ferry for a new Mediterranean economy of cars, families, and cheap sunshine. The rebuild stretched decks and rewired the ship's social map. The old sports deck became the boat deck, extended aft, topped with a raised sun area behind the funnel and an outdoor pool that turned the bows wide into a summer soundtrack. Below deck, the original Comboliner D and A survived. City of York had carried 107 first-class passengers in drawing rooms and cabins with ensuite bathrooms, plus a tennis court and a veranda cafe, luxuries designed for 16-day voyages to South Africa, not overnight crossings. Public rooms were redesigned around movement and light. The promenade deck, once a gentleman's circuit of smoking and writing rooms with a veranda cafe, was carried back to the stern. A second pool appeared, where a working well deck had been erasing the old cargo geometry with leisure lines and big windows. Cabins multiplied and modernized. Air conditioning arrived fleet-wide. Lounges grew broader and brighter, Wood decking framed the pools, and capacity rose toward roughly 1,000 passengers with hundreds of cars on board. A different kind of prosperity in cabins sold and lane meters filled. Routes followed the demand patterns of summer. The sky tied Patras to Italy. Ancona as the main stage, Brindisi is a frequent co-star, and sometimes stretched to Venice the ferry, becoming a floating bus with a bar, a cafeteria, and a dance floor that didn't need a dress code. At dusk, departures felt like rituals, lines of Fiats and Peugeots climbing the stern ramp, truck drivers staking out quiet corners, backpackers discovering that a plastic chair under a sodium light can feel like freedom. Is there warm wine and a cheap ticket to tomorrow? By the late 70s and 80s, Mediterranean Sky was a regular in the Adriatic cast, white and yellow livery, a streamlined profile beside her sister Mediterranean Sea, proof that you could recycle an ocean liner's bones into a moneymaker for holiday traffic and still keep 17 knots on the dial. On board, the vibe split gently by deck, families around the pools and cafeteria, night owls in the lounge, kids marveling at the horizon through thick glass that had once been designed to keep salt out of a working ship, not to frame sunsets for tourists. It worked, until it didn't. Competition sharpened, operating costs climbed, and the balance sheet started coughing. The ship's last scheduled voyage would be in August 1996 from Brindisi to Patras, a routine crossing that turned out to be a curtain call. After that came the paperwork years, a rest in Patras over debts, idling at the quay. By the late 1980s, she'd been brought back to Greece and laid up in a bay, tied beside the former SS America, to ocean liner ghosts awaiting their final act. Charter work followed in the early 90s, troop transport out of Somalia, short cruises for Phoenix Cruises in white livery, then a final stint hosting US troops at Guantanamo Bay. But as contracts dried up and the ship visibly deteriorated, the end came in August 1996, a last crossing from Brindisi to Patras, then seizure for unpaid fuel and port fees, and the tow to Elefsina. Next, the failure chain. Water where it shouldn't be. The list, the decision to beach on November 26, 2002, and the winter that rolled a working ship its side and turned it into a landmark from space. By the late 1990s, the ship was stuck in paperwork and rusty, arrested over debts in Patras, idling 4 years before the tow into Elefsina, where laid-up holes sit like waiting rooms with no clock on the wall. Then the sea found a weakness. In late November 2002, water crept into low spaces. Pumps lost the race. The hull began to list. To keep her from sinking in deep water, tugs dragged Mediterranean Sky into the shallows and beached her on November 26, 2002. Beaching is triage, not a cure. Once a hull settles wrong, gravity does the rest. Through December storms, the list deepened as internal bulkheads and fittings, never meant to be flaws, took loads they couldn't bear. The ship's aged windows and hull plating, decades past their service life, no longer held watertight integrity. As the list reached critical angles, seawater rushed through openings never designed to face the sea. By January 2003, the ship rolled onto her port side and stayed there, half above, half below, a steel cross-section visible from the shoreline like a diagram that forgot to be a lesson until it was too late. Removal was discussed, on paper. In 2009, officials proposed clearing Mediterranean Sky and 17 other hulks from Elefsina Bay. Budgets and priorities sank the plan before the salvors could raise a spud barge. What remained began to change. In 2018, Berlin graffiti crew 1UP roller-painted the exposed hull in letters the size of houses, a tag that shows up on satellites, an accidental title card for a ship that no longer sails but can't quite disappear. Time added more complications. A 2016 risk assessment by University of Athens researchers marked the wreck as reasonably probable to leak hazardous materials with significant to severe damage potential. In November 2020, slicks appeared on the water near the site. In July 2022, A fire scorched a capsized hull, brief, ugly, and telling. Even dead, ships have ways to remind cities they exist. Today, Mediterranean sky is a drone icon, and a municipal headache to 100 meters off Elefsina's shore, visible from the road, easy to film, hard to fix. The bay reflects a bigger truth. It is cheaper to abandon history than to remove it, until the bill arrives as rust, oil, and smoke. Next, legacy. What the wreck tells about the end of combo liners, the rise of cheap flights, and the cost of letting steel sleep in shallow water beside a capital city. Mediterranean sky is what happens when a business model outlives its tools. A combo liner reborn as a cruise ferry, then retired into a bay that turned into a storage room for unsolved problems. Her bones tell a century's arc, Element's empire of roots, the post-war hybrid ships, the jet age's silent guillotine, and the Mediterranean tourism boom that made ferries kings for a generation, until numbers stopped adding up. Elefsina's shoreline makes the coast visible. A 2009 planned her for removal alongside 17 hulks, but the money never matched the mandate, and the hulks kept their moorings as the city tried to reinvent itself around art festivals and green talk. Research flagged the wreck's risk profile as reasonably probable to leak with significant to severe damage, a dry phrase that turned wet in 2020 when slicks showed up, followed by a 2020 fire that briefly put smoke over the bay. Culturally, the ship mutated into a stage. FPV drones surf her ribs, photographers climbed the tide line. And in 2018, the 1UP crew signed the hull in letters so big you can read them from orbit, a tagline for a ship that doesn't move but still travels through cameras. Locals call the area a ship graveyard, and they're not wrong, a place where budgets, courts, and corrosion argue in public, and where memory keeps washing up with each change of light on steel. In the end, the wreck is a mirror. It reflects how quickly infrastructure ages when economics change, and how slowly governments act when the bill includes cutting up a 165-meter problem in shallow water, beside a capital city. For deep SOS, that's the final image. A horizon line wrong by 90 degrees, a painted name across a yellowed hull, and the lesson that history doesn't sink cleanly. It lists it leaks, and it lingers until someone pays to make it leave. Start with the bones. As City of York, the hull measured about 516 feet 5 inches in length, with a 71-foot beam. Classic 1950s British cargo liner proportions that traded brute volume for long-legged range and the steady 70-knot service speed. Across the refit's gross tonnage climbed to around 16,533 by the mid-1990s, as spaces were carved and stretched to fit more passengers. Cars and the public rooms that sell tickets, a physical ledger where every added window meant added revenue. She wasn't an only child. Element built for sisters, City of Port Elizabeth, City of Exeter, City of York, and City of Durban, a post-war quartet with near-identical lines and the same Vickers Armstrong pedigree. Undercarriage Georges, two of the class were reborn into the Mediterranean brand. City of Exeter became Mediterranean Sea. City of York became Mediterranean Sky, a matched pair of white and yellow silhouettes threading the Adriatic summers. The Adriatic gave them a second youth. Cabin plans from the period show how the refits moved walls more than water, promenade rooms pushed aft, pools multiplied, and vehicle lanes cut through the ship's midriff to feed a stern ramp that turned the ferry into a nightly migration route. From a distance, they looked like cruise ships. Up close, they were working machines, Ropox hybrids earning on punctuality and price, proof that you could bend an ocean liner's DNA into a ferry and keep the numbers in black for 20 years. Inside, the contrast was stark. 6 berth cabins replaced first-class drawing rooms. The tennis court vanished under expanded public lounges, and the aft pool, once a luxury for 107 passengers, now served hundreds crowding the sun deck with cheap tickets and warm wind. Zoom out to Elefsina. The bay earned a reputation as an open-air docket, with dozens of wrecks and layups fueling a slow, multi-year cleanup effort by the Port Authority, tenders, appropriations, and salvors balancing risk against scrap value and political patience. Recent initiatives talk about pulling dangerous hulls, staging decontamination first, then demolition, a method that makes sense on paper and stalls in practice when owners vanish and budgets blink. All this frames the Mediterranean sky not as an outlier, but as a case study. A ship is an economy on a keel. When roots die, the hardware lingers, and places like Elefsina inherit the bill, in steel, in oil, in time. For viewers, that's the takeaway before credits. Ships don't simply end. They echo, through sister hulls, old cabin plans, and a wrong-angled skyline that keeps showing up in drone feeds and memory alike. By 2018, a German graffiti crew called 1UP arrived with their mattresses, buckets, and a multi-camera plan. They paddled to the abandoned hull, climbed into gaps, and spray-painted a 40-meter tall name across the port side. Letters so clean and so massive that the tag reads from helicopters and satellite imagery. The painting wasn't vandalism in the old sense. It was a mission statement. You can't ignore this ship, and we won't let you. The 1UP film went viral on YouTube, netting millions of views as climbers and drones began treating Mediterranean sky as an outdoor stage, a place where risk and scale collapse into single cinematic gestures. Suddenly, the wreck had a second audience. Tourists came to photograph it, documentarians filmed it, and the bureaucratic listlessness that had governed the hulk for 15 years met a new pressure: cultural leverage. The wreck became shorthand for a question. What do we do with the industrial leftovers of globalization when we can't afford to dismantle them, can't hide them, and can't bear to leave them alone? Zoom back to the ship-breaking economics that underpin the problem. Modern ship recycling funnels through a handful of countries are Bangladesh, China, India, Pakistan, Turkey, where labor is cheaper and regulations looser than in Europe. A typical deep-sea tanker or bulk carrier arrives at yards in Olyaka, Turkey, or the beaches of Chittagong, Bangladesh gets beached, and workers, often migrant poorly protected, cut it into chunks while contamination pools in water and air. But Mediterranean sky never made it to those yards. She was too close to a capital, too visible, too politically complicated. So she sits in Elefsina, a living fossil of deferred decisions and local protest, a reminder that not all industrial waste leaves the continent. The broader Adriatic and Mediterranean are riddled with similar wrecks. Thousands of ships sit idle, awaiting demolition that requires money and political will that rarely aligns. Pollution hotspot studies identify 27 confirmed sites in the Adriatic alone, many with hazardous cargo or operating vessels releasing ballast water and bilge into fragile tourism zones. For viewers of this series, the takeaway isn't abstract. The Mediterranean sky is one ship, but it's a case study in how infrastructure ages differently depending on location, capital, and closure. A ship in London gets scrapped cleanly. A ship in Elefsina gets a drone tag and a question mark. In the end, she's neither fully dead nor alive, a wreck, a landmark, an artwork canvas, and an environmental argument rolled into one rusting silhouette that time has left as an angle to the horizon. The story ends where it began, half submerged, half remembered, and entirely impossible to ignore.